gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is Debate Sensei, NPDA edition, where we talk about things that are relevant to parliamentary debate. And I have my resident expert, Paul Villa from Diablo Valley College. Thank you so much, Paul, for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here, man.
All right, excellent. So one thing that makes parliamentary debate unique is the different topic every round. There was, a certain intent behind that decision when they created NPDA, and I think it might be sort of getting lost or subverted a bit.
Yes.
But still, the drawback. So there's a lot of benefits to having different topics every single round. Like the breadth of understanding, applying debate concepts to multiple topics is something that I find fascinating and very illuminating. Like you see spaces in between. But I think that that also depends on what topics you are debating and how good they are. And so I think this is a nice way to generally talk about some qualities that makes good topics and bad topics by comparison, right? Like, don't do this type of thing. And so that's what kind of inspired the idea for this particular episode. All right, so let's talk maybe I think what's most entertaining is, how about like pet peeves when it comes to different topics? You're like, oh man, it kind of irks me when this comes out, or a topic is phrased this way, or maybe some don'ts before we get into the do's.
So I think that I've got a few dislikes as opposed to strict don'ts. Right?
Okay.
I definitely have some don'ts, but as far as just dislikes as a category, I think that in parliamentary debate specifically, one of the most annoying kind of topics are legal decision topics that are, for lack of a better word, vague. And what I mean by that is topics that say something like, in the case of blah, blah, blah versus blah, 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 the court should find for the petitioner.
Okay.
And it's just like, I'm like, you know how many words in that I'm going to have to look up to just even know what the af or neg side is, right? Oh, I got to find out what a petitioner is. Got to find out. I find that those sort of court decision topics are, I hate all courts topics, honestly. Basically, pretty much there's never been a courts topic that I enjoyed, whether that's SCOTUS courts, whether that's like, some other court case that's going on. Usually it's SCOTUS. I find those debates to be really limited, and I find them to be very boring because it's like, of course, the negative or the af at some point is just going to be like reading a SCOTUS credibility position. And then outside of that, it's just like, all right, well, what is this decision about? And the problem is that I find it very difficult to analyze the sort of briefings that you can find on those things, like amicus briefings or whatever, or like the, even like legal blogs on these things in the limited amount of time that Parley gives you. Like, it's just the kind of topic that feels like it takes more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes to even have a grip on. That leaves you 10 or 5 minutes to write your actual strategy, which to me is like, not ideal. And that could be fine at like an NPTE where you get a month and a half to prepare, but just like in the moment, like figure out what this law case is, especially if it's an obscure law case, right? Like if it's something that's news, that's different. But like just some state court is having this trial about something no one's heard of. Okay, do it.
Yeah, and it seems like you're just setting it up for a fairly shallow debate, because it's really going to be about I don't know, sometimes people run activism positions, sometimes like the credibility,
like judicial activism,
and so and then there's always the fiat arguments about, I don't know why like SCOTUS decisions get different fiat treatment than like
it's Congress. So weird because some people would be like, on a 6-3 decision the Supreme Court should, and I'm like, what? Can we specify that like who in Congress passed? Like what?
So it is, I don't know why it gets so weird with court topics, but it's never been good. You're right. Like I'm thinking back, I can't remember like details, but like I remember vaguely the sort of feeling. I'm like, well, that was a lot crappier than it should have been, because like the nuances in the court case are probably pretty significant and important, and something that should be debated, but you need a little bit more prior knowledge than 20 minutes.
There's also sort of this idea like there's a difference between a like politically controversial topic and like a debatable topic too.
Okay.
And I feel like a lot of these court cases ends up being like, well, there's just ground for one side, really, like at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And then other than that, it's just sort of like ideological, like right wing backlash or like, you know, blue wave, whatever it's going to be on that topic. One of the worst things about these debates, especially when it's SCOTUS, though, is people are kind of used to the court topics and they're used to reading their like court clog DA, right? Being like,
Oh, yeah.
court clog. And then they read that on like a SCOTUS topic.
Yeah.
It's like they get to pick what cases they see. How can you clog a docket that they pick?
Yeah.
Like, I don't. Just I mean, so I don't find any of those debates super fun. I think the next category of my dislikes is largely judging pool based, for lack of a better word.
Okay.
I think that whole law resolutions are completely pointless depending on the judging like sort of spectrum you find yourself within.
Okay, whole law.
Yeah, so like a whole law res where they say the Senate, like past Senate bills 8291, the Kill All the Birds Act or whatever. Right?
Oh, okay,
Whole
okay.
law res, meaning only a single possible affirmative action must defend the entirety of the bill. Because objectively, if the judge is gonna allow the team to read a plan inclusive counterplan, the AF should just always lose. There always is some provision in every single law that it would be net beneficial to eliminate. And the reason I don't like these debates is because what it comes down to is either you get a judge who will not vote on a, well, I guess really the theory argument, because the AF in these debates will read, you can't read a plan inclusive counterplan against a whole law res, right?
Right.
If the judge is willing to vote on that, then the debate was pointless because the judge is just going to vote on theory and we're not even going to have the actual substance debate. And if the judge will not vote on that, then the AF just loses because the negative gets to steal 99.9% of the AF and just read the smallest net benefit to still win the round. And so kind of for similar reasons, right, where it's just like it's this very technical thing. And every time my team is negative on these whole law reses, I just pull up the text of the bill and I just read it in order until I get to something where I'm like, this is dumb. We're going to pick out of this, right?
Yeah.
There's just always something. And it's just not possible in Parley for the affirmative in 20 minutes to be ready to defend all 300 pages of some major law. And we only debate major laws. Like we never debate a law that's 2 pages long. That's like, I don't know, just name some military base after a guy. And so for similar reasons, right? It's just like resolutions that to me ignore that Parley is an extemporaneous event where the topic changes every round. You only get 20 minutes. Aren't great.
Right.
All of that. But I don't know, what is your take? Do you have any big pet peeves that are
bi-directional topics?
Oh, yeah, that's unbelievable. So frustrating.
Yeah, that's one that I really I can't stand. You know what I mean? So like to significantly reform, and so it's like, you know, is it being more restrictive or less restrictive in a significant way? And so yeah, I think that so for anyone who's watching this and they're trying to like, okay, I want to write good topics. What bi-directional means is that the affirmative can choose whether or not to be like on the political spectrum, right or left, right? They could choose that, or then, you know, like that they have so many different options because it just says to change something, but it doesn't say to change it in what way. So being a little bit more specific, like if somebody says that we should, this is a really bad example, but it's like the minimum wage needs to be changed, right? Now somebody's like ultra libertarian, yeah, it needs to be changed, we need to abolish it and do UBI or something like that, you know, and like, okay, you're just like you got to limit the affirmative in some ways, right? But what you're talking about is over limiting, right? The Supreme Court cases and whole law cases like over limiting, and in the opposite direction. I also had that pet peeve. So there's like this sweet spot, you know, where it's not too restrictive, but at the same time, it's not too expansive, you know, where it gives the affirmative all sorts of ground as well for the same reason.
And I find that this is actually where a lot of students struggle when it comes to like tea debates on weird resolutions.
Yeah.
Where you know, they're used to reading their standard like limits. This is what limits means, or you know, afflex. This is what afflex means. But the problem is a lot of students aren't prepared to actually describe, here is why an interpretation of this topic where these 5 affirmatives are allowed is good enough for the AF that we can have some variability. It's not always
Right.
the same debate, but still means that the core generics on the topic will link
Yeah.
for the negative. And that's the biggest thing for me, right? Is that in partly more so than evidentiary debate where it's the same topic all year or all month, depending on if you're in high school or whatever. You just have to make sure the negative has access to generic positions. Like if the negative
Yes.
can't hedge, BizCon, these kind of politics or whatever, they're just going to lose. Like they
Right.
just should lose these debates. And so if you give the AF enough flexibility that they get to skirt core generics, then like we're just doomed.
So let's switch from, okay, wait, you said that there were some things that irked you, but then there were some don'ts. Let's get into that. Let's get into some like, okay, don't do this. Like I would say bidirectionality, don't do it. Like, you know, like I would say like it's just a bad idea. Whereas there might be some exceptions to SCOTUS cases and whole law. Maybe I could think of, you know, just exceptions to that rule. Like for bidirectional, I'm like, I think it's just best to avoid it altogether. Is there don'ts that you have?
Yeah, on my list of don'ts, things that drive me crazy is any resolution where it is not essentially objectively clear if it is policy factor value.
Oh, okay.
I cannot stand when a topic is written like the United States should prioritize space funding over ocean funding.
Oh, gee.
And I'm just sitting there like, I'm like, so do I get to pass a plan that does A at the expense of B? Or do I just have to defend that conceptually? And the reason I don't like that is because, once again, what is the end result of that debate? The judge either believes Tricot or doesn't, and the team wins or doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not, it's no longer about the actual like topic and being centered on those kinds of things. And I think that any debate that discourages people from talking about the sort of core controversy of the resolution is not ideal. And those drive me crazy. And the thing is, I can understand fact versus value where there's confusion, where like there's clearly not a consensus on what that should look like. And I asked judges and friends and students regularly, like, do you think this is a fact or value? And if we disagree or we agree or whatever. In SoCal, the magic phrase seems to be evaluative statement, like without ever explained what they mean by that. In NorCal, we tend to talk about descriptive languages versus prescriptive languages. But anyway, with all that said, that's understandable. It should never be a question whether a topic is a policy or something else. Policy is a solved game. Who should do what? Like and so the things like that I find very frustrating.
Right.
The second, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. I want to hear this next one.
The second on my list of things that I absolutely hate are what I would refer to as impossible AF burdens.
Okay. So, I'm following.
And so what I mean by that is there's a few different ways this manifests. In IPDA, where students get to strike from 5 topics, including one of your topics that says X is the most important thing, is fine. Because if the team is AF and smart, they will get rid of that topic, right?
Yeah.
And so, for instance, this weekend, one of the IPDA topics, the final IPDA topic, one of them for NCFA, was the pursuit of happiness is the most important goal in life. It's like the AF, it should not be possible for the AF to win that debate.
Right.
Because the negative gets the field. The negative gets anything else and everything else is more important. And sometimes this comes up in Parley, usually when people who don't do Parley as like an event on their team.
Right.
Which then brings you to my probably biggest pet peeve, because this actually happens relatively often in both Southern and Northern California, but it does not happen on the national circuit ever.
Okay.
Metaphor topics and elimination rounds.
Oh, in an elimination, absolutely in elimination.
I think in a prelim, you get it. Like, let's just test the kids. Let's see what's up with that. You know, sucks like it's your break round, but like, you know, there's because metaphor resolutions are totally fine if they are paired. And what I mean by that, for folks who don't do tournament design and whatnot, is you have round 1 and round 2 both be a metaphor. Why do you do that? because metaphors are almost universally understood to be AF-sided topics. And
Right.
so you need to make sure that students who had an advantage in round 1 as the affirmative do not have the advantage in round 2 because they will switch sides and be negative, right? This
Right.
isn't a policy debate where we debate the same resolution over and over and over again. And so in elimination rounds, that doesn't happen. There are no paired resolutions. And there was tournament in NorCal. Okay, I'm not going to say who or whatever. That did not use metaphor resolutions a single time in prelims, and then every single elimination round resolution was a metaphor. And I'm just like, you just actually don't like debate. You don't get it. You have no idea what's going on. And it's like it was themed. So it was like silly stuff, right? Like it was a tournament that was like they had a theme, and so then all the resolutions had this theme, and it's like the circus is over, and it's like, oh cool, AF win. Pick anything that should be over.
I'm totally with you on this because like it's AF's round to lose, right? And so so both sides should get an equal chance to lose, basically. And so if you lose your AF, it's like, yeah, that sucks, right? But unless it's double elimination, you're right. You only get one chance in elims, and so making it in that situation, the high stakes situation, it's just a bad call. But I loved metaphor resolutions. I even loved them on the neg because I'm like, all right, this is my chance. This is my chance to one up the affirmative. You know what I mean? Like, you usually can find some pretty good critical ground on a metaphor, and you just find it like the core, like you were talking about, like the core debate issues, even in a metaphor, as if you can identify that, then as soon as they bring up whatever policy they're doing, you're like, okay, if I apply my critique to their policy, what do I get? And it's hard, but you can do that in 7 minutes. You can.
I think the problem, to a certain degree, for me, when it comes to these competitive rounds or whatever, is that I think people approach metaphor topics wrong and coach metaphor topics wrong as the affirmative. Because what I've heard for years and years, even when I was a competitor and as a coach now, and I know teams do this, is they have a pocket file, basically, right? They have a pocket AF that is just a good idea AF, right? And so I remember back, there was a team years ago in NorCal that their pocket AF was like mosquito nets for Africa.
Right.
Your AF, right? Things like that. And I actually think that is the only way the AF can lose in a metaphor round.
Okay.
Because if you pick something that like just objectively is a good idea and that is not actually applicable to the topic, because you're just going to force it every single time, like that's the one time the judge is gonna vote on topicality or whatever, and they give you a shot, right? But if you just pick something super reasonable and actually related to the topic, I don't know how you can lose, right? So for instance, if the resolution was it is time for the circus to end.
Right.
And you say Barnum and Bailey should cease operation. How can you lose that debate? Like, unless the other team happens to be ready to say circus is good. Like, if they just have their circus good file memorized in their head, right? Like, every judge is going to go like, look, they gave you every chance possible to beat them. But the reality is, if you're the negative, you're just sitting in prep and you're writing topicality, and then that's it. Because you have no idea what the app's going to do. And I think that makes no sense in Parley. It makes sense in LD and in policy, where people break new and elims all the time. Totally understandable. But you have your generics and you have your evidence. And like, the topics are written in such a way that you're going to get a link to deterrence. You're going to get a link to NATO cohesion or whatever it's going to be. But in Parley, none of that is guaranteed. And it's just like, oh, okay, cool. AF, pick your favorite AF.
All right. So we talked about things that bother us. I think that's usually the longer list, honestly. Things to avoid when writing resolutions. Let's transition to good ideas. All right. Advice, suggestions on writing good topics, or just identifying good topics when you see them. You got something that pops to mind?
When it comes to let me start with my favorite topic in debate. Okay. We got to debate my favorite topic in debate this weekend. My absolute favorite debate topic is nuclear energy.
Oh, really?
I think nuclear energy. Like, and there's a lot of ways to write this. You can write it as a fact, you can write it as a value, you can write it as a policy. I think nuclear energy good, basically, or nuclear energy bad, basically, however you want to write it. If it's a policy, obviously, you're probably going to write like increase or reduce nuclear energy. If it's fact, nuclear energy is necessary, or if it's value, nuclear energy is preferable, or nuclear energy does more harm than good, whatever.
Right.
Nuclear energy to me is one of the best topics imaginable because there is a ton of ground on the AF, there is a ton of ground on the negative, right?
Right.
And very different ground, right? The negative does not come up and say, actually, nuclear energy doesn't work because it just
Yeah.
doesn't work, right? But their concerns are like security concerns, right? Or uranium extraction concerns, or
Yes. Yes.
the impact on different dimensions in that sort of spec, or prolif, for instance. But what makes it such a good topic is the fact that whether your opponent comes up and says it's fact or value or policy, all of your arguments will certainly still apply.
Yeah. I
Because
see what you mean.
and so to me, it's like the perfect resolution because it means everyone has a fair shot at it. I would lean towards, like, from my perspective, I think it's probably half-sided, strictly speaking. And so
Mhm.
if I was to neg in an IPDA debate, I would strike it. But if I got that topic in a parley elimination round, I'm not like, well, it's doomed. I'm like, awesome. I've got 4 disads I know will link for sure. And it's
Mhm.
just a question if I can do the better debating than the other person. And so when I think about what makes that a good topic, I think it is that it is a controversial, not necessarily politically, but just
Right.
controversial in terms of one's value assessment of it. Do you think saving the environment matters more than a specific kind of environmental racism, or do you
Yeah.
think preventing climate change matters more than preventing waste storage and or nuclear war potentially in some scenarios or whatever? Like it forces debaters to be able to defend that their impact actually is the one that matters most in the debate. And those are the best debates, the debates where teams just get to throw down on something. No one runs from that debate either, right? Like if you're the AF on a nuclear
Right.
energy topic, why
Right.
would you decay? You think you've got a good shot in this round. And that's my favorite thing. I want debates where both sides feel prepared and are just happy to throw down. You're going to say nuclear energy good. They're going to say nuclear energy bad. No one's going to read a procedural or whatever that says, like, well, actually, nuclear energy doesn't mean what you think it means. It means this. Like, and if they do, it's silly and easy to beat back.
Okay, so I don't want to go too far down this. I got a little bit of a tangent though. With all the advances in fusion energy, like like you think that changes the predictability of the debate? Like
I think it makes it even more AF-sided. But
yeah,
I think the answers to most of those things are like, yeah, but it's not ready at scale. And I think the
right.
solution to that potentially is rewriting of the topic instead of being a policy, as do it as a value or a fact.
Okay.
And instead of saying nuclear energy does, maybe say nuclear energy has done more good, so that they don't get to read arguments about like future propensity of fusion to solve or whatever. Or change it to say nuclear fission if you really want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. Right.
Like,
Right. In
basically, yeah, the thing,
actually
and that's what's great about it, because you can change like one word on the topic to make the debate about what you want it to be about. Is it the
right.
future of nuclear energy? Is it the past of nuclear energy? Is it fission? Is it fusion? So on and so forth.
Right. Right.
And there's
Right.
great competitive counterplans: solar, wind, geothermal,
Right.
different form of nuclear, etc.
Right. Um, yeah. So you're talking about like having fact and value rounds coming into it. You know, my one of my favorite ways to word a value round. So I'm so used to them just being this versus that format. All
That's
right.
my
So
preference.
yeah, what?
That's my preference for sure.
Oh yeah.
I think
Okay.
it's the clearest way to signal to a student you want them to have a value debate instead of a fact
Oh,
debate,
absolutely.
and I like that.
I
Yeah.
do. I love them, and it kind of makes it, you know, they're kind of forced into different camps to some degree. I mean, sometimes people try to ride the fence, but it's such little ground. You got to prepare your side a little bit more. One thing I recently came on was just tagging on the term overrated. So something is overrated. I'm like, that's not bad. You know what? That's not bad because it's not a, you know, you're not comparing two things. And so the way I distinguish that is the comparative value versus intrinsic value.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, oh man, that's not bad. And the possibilities are like endless. All you have to do is say this thing is over, like the Oscars are overrated. And I think that's a good freaking debate right there. You know what I mean? You don't have to say that Oscars are better than Golden Globes or SAG or something else. You know, I think that's, you know, a really, really easy way to write a different type of value resolution.
Yeah, I think the I definitely don't mind that, but I think it does kind of come into what I worry about sometimes, right? Because these are actually, that's pretty much the exact wording where I find me and colleagues end up disagreeing on whether it is a factor of value, and
Oh,
where I find arguments on both sides reasonably persuasive.
okay.
Because the way I usually, in terms of like a calm argumentation in debate class, try and explain, because you have the whole like state requirement for like ability to identify a
Yeah.
resolution of fact, value, etc. Because fact and value feel very similar. To me, the distinction between a value and a fact topic that I usually tell kids is that fact is a diagnosis of exclusion. And what I mean by that is if we can't verify it is a value, then it is inherently a fact at that point. And the way I usually tell people is that fact or value topics tend to indicate or should indicate prioritization, preference, or explicit assigning of value uh,
Mm.
of something or between competing options. I also tell them that a good way to signal a value topic is the word ought. And I
Yeah.
think if every topic, if we could all just agree that like we're going to include the word ought if it's value and we're not going to include it if it's not, then that solves a lot of problems. I think if we made it very clear that it's like prioritization or preference or comparing of two options is value, that would be good. But the problem with that topic for me is that, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, but in NorCal, there's a lot of people whose opinion is our will has all
Uh,
facts by definition, right? Like
uh,
the word is our will has
uh,
suggests this. And then the question becomes, yeah, but how, in order to know that it is our will has overrated,
yeah.
overrated is not an
But,
objectively measurable concept using a preponderance of evidence. And so you
but
must
like
assign
even,
value to determine it. And
but
so,
this is better than that has the word is in it.
yeah.
Like it's clearly a value. It has the word is in it. It's like using those particular.
And that's exactly why I do the like diagnosis of exclusion thing, where I'm like,
Yeah.
sure, it has the word is, but because it has a call for comparison, preference, or prioritization, we know
Yeah.
its value. And that's why me and my colleagues disagree, because they're like most people like this weekend, that topic I mentioned earlier of the most important goal in life is the pursuit of happiness. I was like, this is objectively probably a value, but
Right.
I'm gonna assume they're gonna say it's a fact. So why don't we just prepare it with a bunch of facts and hope for the best? And I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, hey, just write your case so that if they come up and say it's a value, if they come up and say a fact, we're still good. Okay, cool. The value is utilitarianism. Okay, cool. Here's all our preponderance of evidence, so on and so forth.
In my opinion, really the only two examples I could think of questions of fact, like I don't like calling them fact debates. I like calling them questions of fact, is either categorical or conjecture. It's like so you are either like categorizing something like cereal is soup, right? That's a categorical claim right there. Wonder Woman is not a feminist. Categorical claim. It is not making some sort of judgment statement about the like whether or not soup is the best food or whether or not feminism is good or bad. It's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like here's a category. Does it belong in that category?
Mm-hmm.
Is one type of fact, and then conjecture is just predicting the future. And those things are the only I can't really think of other categorical examples of fact resolutions. And then I would put the other stuff into value.
Yeah, and see, once again, it's like it's kind of that. This is the weird thing with fact and value, because we have not, as a community, agreed, or even scholars, for whatever reason, haven't strictly agreed. Like these are the words we'll use to signal this thing.
Yeah.
You get into this question where both you and me, when it comes to my definition of value, your definition of fact, is and everything else is the other one,
Yeah.
right? And it's like that's not a great way of defining things, right? Because it's sort of like we have set a like I guess like a floor, but not necessarily a ceiling to what these topics can look like.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean honestly, that's something I do with my students pretty regularly. Is we go through like all the slates of topics from tournaments that are published, and I go, is this a fact? Is this a value? And I don't even care what their answer is, as long as they feel like they can justify it, right? I tell them, okay, so convince me why. If you're doing resolution analysis, why is this a fact? Why is this a value? Here's why I disagree with you. I think it's a value because of this. Here's why I think it's a fact, so on
Yeah.
and so forth. But yeah, I do think, and this is why for I think it's Fire Pie, maybe it's State as well now. I can't
Okay.
remember if State has this as a rule, because I know I'm the one who tried to like pass it. I know I got it approved at one of them, but at State now, I'm pretty sure you have to in the resolution indicate whether it is a fact, value, or policy.
Okay. God.
And that is because the invitation says, per the rules, every slate of 5 resolutions will include 2 policy, 2 value, and 1 fact. And so,
Okay.
like, for the sake of like weird, like protesty kinds of things, where it's like, well, there was no fact resolution, there was only 1 value resolution, there were 3 value resolutions, whatever, right? Like, indicating it is at least a good thing, you know what I mean? But it does take away some of the students doing the work of like being able to explain why it is one or the other.
And at least they can't run tricot now. The guy like
Well, and that's the thing, and that was part of my goal. So I'm like, why do you want kids to have tricot debates? Like, I don't care. I like a tricot debate. Like, I think it's good for students to be able to explain this. But the people who are judging this tournament don't want that. They don't know what tricot is. Like, a lot of them, you know, there's speech mains who don't do debate, and so it's like, why do we want this person who doesn't do debate to have to watch a theory debate?
Okay, all right. Any other, like, I don't want to like
Sure.
we're at our 30 minutes, but
Yeah.
you got any other things that you wanted to get out before
So there's one last thing that I forgot to mention, which is I mean, and this is kind of like, I guess, like obvious, but has happened enough times that I have to say something. Topics that aren't possible or that don't make sense.
I didn't know what I was expecting you to say, but then that hit me. Oh my god!
So I can give
know what
you
you're talking about.
I can give you like 2 or 3 examples off the top of my head. My junior year at nationals, the first prelim of NPDA was a submitted topic, and it was a topic from Sam Cooke, and the topic was supposed to be about the United States removing THAAD from South Korea, right? And THAAD is a like missile defense system, but THAAD stands for like, I think it's like high altitude aerial defense system or something like that. In fact,
Okay.
I'm going to look it up real quick, just so that I'm not wrong. It is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System. Okay, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System.
Okay.
And that's the topic that was submitted by this debater. But for some reason, they changed the word, right? They changed it from high altitude area defense system to high altitude air defense system, right? Like, they just understand that. And the byproduct of this was, if you read a plan text that was topical, it was impossible because that thing didn't exist.
Okay.
And so what you're forced to do in that round is, do you decide, do we defend the resolution as it is written, which means it doesn't do anything because that doesn't exist? Or do we be not topical and try to convince the judge that, hey, we're telling you this thing doesn't exist, and then risk losing on T because even though we couldn't do it right, we're going to lose. Another example of that, at Mile High the year before, there was a topic that was like the ICJ, or I can't remember, it was either the ICJ or the ICC should rule in this thing or should prosecute this person. And it was supposed to be the ICJ, but they said the ICC,
and they
did not have authority to even do this, right?
Man.
And this was like ellipse. And so it's just like, I just think that it's so easy to run your topic by anyone or Google, perhaps, and figure these things out ahead of time. And so to me, when those kinds of issues happen, it's just like, how much were you rushing that you couldn't figure this out ahead of time? Like, impossible topics.
I want to ask one more follow-up question that then, like, let's say from a judge's perspective, you are aware of the impossibility of the topic. What would you recommend a judge do in that situation? Because in my opinion, like, our job is to make sure that like a debate happens and we evaluate who is better at the debate, not necessarily like the truth of the topic, right? And usually those things don't come into conflict, but this is one situation where it does seem to come into conflict. And I don't know, I'd be leaning toward like, how can we make sure that a debate still happens? And
yeah,
like,
so I can tell you what happened in that round for us and my feelings on it. So we decided to go with, we're going to defend the actual thing. And we started the debate by going, hey, my partner intentionally, like when she reads it, she goes, the resolution says the high altitude air defense system. Air, right? And then when we get to the inheritance, we're like, that doesn't exist. There's no such thing called the high altitude air defense system. It's a high altitude area defense system. But for the record, if they think this thing does exist and is in South Korea and is a missile defense system, we will still give them all of their links based on those things.
Oh yeah.
And so that's what we did. We didn't no link them at all. We just said whatever. And then they went on T because the judge said, well, that wasn't the topic. And I thought that was incredibly stupid.
Yeah.
And, you know, so when you ask me now, I'm like, if I know that obviously the resolution was supposed to have this other word, and if a student knows that and tells me it and like is clear on it, I don't know how I can like turn my brain off. Like there's this concept of like, you know, being like tabula rasa or whatever. And it's like, okay, I was tabula rasa until the student said the thing that I know is true and like made the argument. And now when the other kid comes up and says, well, that's not true, I'm not going to go, oh, well, I guess that's equally valid.
Yeah, right. Because I mean, the argument was made that like this thing doesn't exist, but something else does, and it is debatable. Like that argument, it's on the freaking record. Like read it back to me, please. You know, like there, like. So if you're tabula rasa, that should be part of the transcript that you can reference at any time to make a judgment.
And so the bottom line is, I think that like you have, like you're saying, right? The priority is that kids have these debates and whatnot. And like, I'm not excited to vote on a T that's like, hey, the AF lost because the person who wrote the topic is an idiot.
Right.
And the AF did everything they could to make this fair and educational. And like, you know, and this is, I guess it's just a matter of opinion or whatever, but like I put this in my philosophy, like I 100% default to reasonability on T unless told otherwise. If I think your AF is topical when you read the plan text and read the AF in the 1AC, I don't know why I should suddenly change my opinion about that because someone has a weird definition of T, unless they argue it more effectively than you do. And so, I mean, I think reasonability is what reasonable people do.
Yeah. And I think like in I don't know, like ground is a really big part of that reasonability, right? It's like, because like this is an activity where both sides are supposed to start with ground. And as long as like the way that I lay it out preserves some level of ground for both sides, I consider that to be also reasonable, right? So, so what the hell am I like? I'm not going to be punishing them because you came up with some sort of tricky little definition or something like that.
So basically, I mean, that's my take on the topics, right? I think there's a large number of things you can do wrong. There's a few things you can do right in terms of your wording to really help people out, and you know, considering the sort of controversy of the topic. And I think at an absolute minimum, you should run your topic by another person or before you run your tournament.
Well,
that's about it. I don't ask for much.
Yeah, I know. Just like Google it. Google your thing before you put it out there, you know. All right. Hey, Paul, it was a good discussion. Like I think that was I'm hoping that this helps some people drafting resolutions in the future. Thank you so much for joining me.
Have a good one.
All right.